So how do we write a class? Well, let's make a program. We'll call it classdemo.py. And very simply, it's a little bit the way you write a function. You put class and then the name of your class, and then a colon. So unlike a function, you don't have parentheses with the class, just the name. And by convention, classes are capitalized. And then you put in your class methods. So let's diagram out this class that we want to build. So I'm going to make a UML, and we're making this person class. And what attributes do we have? So we're going to make this a very simple class to begin with. We're just going to have name. And then the methods that we're going to have is we're going to have a set name method, which is we're going to learn is going to take self and name. And then a get name method, which will just take self. And then let's make a greet method, which is just going to say, hello, my name is, or something of that nature. So this is a graphic representation of our class. Let me try to get this over to the side a little bit more so that we have more real estate. If it let me. Nope, that's as small as we'll go. So when we're defining this class, there we have the name ends up here under class, and then the next thing is we're actually going to start working on these methods, and this will come into existence through implication of these methods. So we're going to just like we define a function, we're going to say define set name, self and name. And the reason we have this self variable is this is a placeholder for the object that's going to be created. That's not going to make sense right away. So what we're going to do is we're going to say self.name is equal to name. And what's happening here is self.name is actually different than name. What self.name is we're going to make a variable under self, under the object that's going to be created, that's going to be called name, that will be set equal to this name parameter when we call set name. So when we call set name, we're going to pass in the name that we want to set into this person object, and then we're going to assign that into self.name. So this could be, in fact, it doesn't really matter what this is called as long as these two are the same. This is just saying take whatever this is and assign it into self.name. By convention, though, we often make this be the same, just because otherwise we end up having, a lot of variables involved. And it really is, this is a name that we're setting into self's name. Then we're going to define this getName method. And this is a very common structure for classes, is we will have get and set methods for all the attributes that we have here. So if this person's, the attribute is name, or which is represented as a variable, and then we are going to have a set name and a get name. Those are setters and getters, and then we might have any other methods that might do things otherwise. But almost always with the class, whatever attributes up here will have setters and getters for them. And with the getter, it just has the variable self. And all it does is return self.name. So the way you can think of the set method is this is a method to change the name of the person. The get method is to find out what the person's name is. So this is like an input function. This is an output function. And we'll write greet later. Now what can we do with this? If I run this right now, it won't really do anything. It's kind of like when you define a function but you don't use it. In fact, at this point, it's not even taking up any memory. To make it take memory out, to actually make a person object, we start off with a variable name, and we're going to make, first variable be person1, and then we do this thing that's called instantiation. And so what we're going to do is we're going to instantiate a person. And that's all you do to instantiate a person. Now again, at this point, we're not going to see much, but a person object has been created in memory, and actually space is available now to store, a name for person. And so memory allocation has been done. There is a person that's available in memory that we can start working with. So now let's set the person's name. And the way we do that is we now say person1. So this is the object. This is the class. We have made a person1 object from the class. And we're going to say person1.setName, and let's make it Luke Skywalker. So what is happening here? So Luke Skywalker is being passed to the setName function. But wait, setName takes two parameters. It takes a self and a name. Well, it turns out that self is a very special variable in Python, and you don't have to pass it in the parentheses of the function call, because it will get self from the object. So actually self ends up being person1. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say person1.name is equal to the name that passed in. So what this will do is set person1.name equal to Luke Skywalker. And to experiment with that, let's put a stop point here and run in debug mode. Okay, so here we are, beginning of the class. Actually, nothing is going to be done here. I'm going to step over. We get our definitions. And now we're going to instantiate this person1. I'm going to step over that, and we have person1. Now, notice that it creates person1 here. Let me maximize this to make it easier to see everything. And so person1 is actually this person object at this memory location. So when we did this instantiation statement, that's where we're actually creating a person object in memory. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to step into this function call. And you notice it does go into this class's function call here. Notice that name is Luke Skywalker. So this argument went into the second parameter. Well, where did it get self? Well, let's hover over self. And we can see that it's person object at 225038FFE20. Is that what it is? Yes, both of those are the same. So this self actually got a reference to this object here. And then what we're doing is we're taking that self and we're saying, hey, assign whatever name is, which is Luke Skywalker, into self.name. So I'm going to step over one more time, and unfortunately it doesn't stop here, but basically this gets assigned into here. So how can we show that? Well, let's do this. Let's print person1 name and see what we get. So again, I'm going to run this in debug mode. I'm going to step over the class definition. I'm going to step over the the instantiation. So we've got our, and notice now the memory address is different because every time this runs, it's going to use a different piece of memory to store this person1 object. So now we're here. I'm going to step into that function. Luke Skywalker goes here. I'm going to step over one more. And let's look at person1. And we see here's person1. And notice that there's this now name is Luke Skywalker. So person1 dot name is not this variable here. This is now self.name ended up assigning Luke Skywalker into person1.name. And if I step over one more time, we can see how it prints out Luke Skywalker. Okay, so why do we do all this? Well, let's say I wanted to create a second person. So I want to make another person. And this time I'm going to set person2.setName to Anakin Skywalker. And then I'm going to print both of their names out. So I've created two people. I've set their names, and then I'm going to print person1 name and person2 name. Okay, so I'm going to run this in debug mode again. And now here we are at person1. I create person1. It shows up here. And I create person2. Now notice this. Both of these exist in separate locations in memory. So even though they're both of a person class, they're two objects, two different variables, storing information for each one in separate places of memory. Now we're about to set the name into Luke Skywalker. If this was just, set some variable equal name, every time we call this, it would set the same name into the same location in memory. The purpose of the set, let me step into this function, is to identify which block of memory we want to, which object, which thing in memory's name attribute we want to set to this variable here. So when we do this here, calling set name on person1, it's going to change person1's name, but it's not going to change person2's name. So let me run that. And now if we look at person1, person1's name is Luke Skywalker. If I look at person2, person2 doesn't have a name yet. So they each have their own name. They're using the same class to do this function. Since this function was written before we created, our objects, it has to have some placeholder to use to reference what the memory store for that object is going to be. And so self is really a placeholder for person1 and person2 that you use before you write them. And it's kind of a chicken and egg issue, right? We wouldn't be able to use person1 and person2 here because we have to write the class before we can declare an object of that class type. So we have to use this placeholder to say, hey, once you have your object, set the name attribute of that object to this value. So when we do this next one, we're going to run that again. I'll step into it. Now we're setting Anakin into this second object. And if I step over that, now if we look at person 2, name is Anakin Skywalker. If I look at person 1, the name is Luke Skywalker. So they each have got their name, and they each have that value set in their unique memory space for that object. The object name is here on the left of the assignment operator. It's basically the object is a variable. It's just a variable name. Just like when you set, a number into a variable, you set a string into a variable, now you're setting a person into a variable. The person on the right is the class. And so what we're doing when we put these parentheses next to a class is we're saying, hey, Python, instantiate one of these person objects, give it a place in memory large enough to hold its information, and point this variable person1 to it. And person1 becomes the object. So here we're going to do the same thing. We're going to print out the name. Notice that person 1's name is Luke Skywalker and person 2's name is Anakin Skywalker. So this is, it's a little bit like the dictionary where we had key value pairs, but rather than key value pairs, a class is a little bit more powerful in that we can use code to set and get things out of it. We're going to learn later that we can do additional things inside of the set. For example, we can do validation. We can do, in fact, we could give an example of that. Let's say that a name has to have at least 3 characters. We could do something like this. We could say if the len of name is greater than 3, I guess I don't need these parentheses here, they're extra, then we'll set self.name. And so what this will do is ensure that you can't set a name that's less than 3. So if I put, Luke Skywalker here, it won't actually set it. So now we're here. Oh. So what we ended up getting is we get an error. So maybe what we'll do is we'll say else name equals invalid name. Oh, I made another mistake. This needs to be self.name. So now what happens is, because we tried to set a name that was too short, it was less than 3, instead of saying name, it put in invalid name, and we were able to say, you know what, if you can't provide at least 3 characters, then we're not going to keep track of that name because it's invalid. And so this is called validation. And so the reason to do this instead of maybe a dictionary or maybe something simpler is that we can use the set we can use the set to do validation before we assign something in. We can write code to make sure that what we're getting is correct. Now, most of the time, often we don't always use validation. Often our set methods just look like this. And the structure of the self method is basically that. The structure of these get and set methods is basically this. Set methods take self and name. They take name and set it into self.name. Get methods only have self and just return self.name. And so the get, in a sense, you can think of it as set is as if you're have a box and you're putting the name into that box and storing it. And that box is temporarily called self, but eventually that box will be person 1 or person 2 or whatever the object name is. And so every time you instantiate a person, you're instantiating a box to put information in. When you call a set method, you're putting information into the appropriate box. When you're using a get method, you're pulling the information out of that appropriate box. So that's what's happening here. Take the appropriate information out of the correct box and return name. So these are ways of having different containers for different pieces, different sets of information. Now, let's make this greet method. So now that we have, a way of setting and getting a name, we can use that name to do something else. So let's do this greet method, and we're just going to this is just going to be kind of like the get name. But what we're going to do here is we're just going to print. Let's use a format string so that we can make it look nice, and we'll say, "Hello world, my name is," and then where are we going to get the name to display? Well, we did pass a name into greet. Where is greet going to get the name? Well, we kind of did, because we passed in self. And self has, if the set name function has been called, will have a name. So we can say name is self.name. Hello world, my name is self.name. So the nice thing about self is that every method and all these functions which are defined inside of a class are called methods by convention. So all these methods have access to self. So if any other method assigns something to self, the other any method can retrieve whatever was set in here. So if this is called first, then we can retrieve it using self. So now what we'll do is let's call greet, and so we'll say person 1. So all your methods will start with the object name, then you put a dot, and then you call the method that you want. And we're going to call greet. And so let's run that. And we can see here, when we called person 1 greet, it said, hello world, my name is, and for person 1, since the name was set to Luke Skywalker, it says my name is Luke Skywalker. For person 2 greet, since the name that was set into person 2 is Anakin Skywalker, when we call the greet method on person 2, it uses person 2's name. So person 2 went in for self, and it used person 2's name. Now what about this get method? Well, the get method actually does the same thing as just, as these. So rather than calling the attribute directly, I can say get name, and here I can say same thing. And note, just like the greet method, I don't need to pass in the name because it already has it. Person 1 already knows what its name is. So when I get name, it just returns self.name, and it does the same. It sort of does the same thing as it did before. And we can see here where we get back Luke Skywalker and Anakin Skywalker when we use get name, just the same as just calling name. So these kind of do the same thing, and you might be asking, well, why do we have a get method when you could just call name? Well, usually we're going to find out later we're going to use something called properties, and we need both a set and get method for them. And the other reason is, some symmetry. So if you have a set method, typically you have a get method that goes with it. So that is the fundamentals of writing a class with get and set methods, and then a specialized method which uses that information after they've been set. And then we saw how to instantiate an object. We saw how to use the set method to set things into the objects. We saw how we can get objects out by using the attribute directly or by using the get method. And we saw how we can just call the greet methods. Notice that when you're talking about object-oriented programming, you invariably are using this dot to get an attribute or get and to call one of its functions. Thank you.